All right, December 1, 2023, Christmas right around the corner. That does not mean that you check your common sense after Black Friday. It doesn't mean you check your common sense going into the holiday spending or the family chaos or Christmas Vacation, the movie, which seems to be completely without common sense. But here we are, CommonSenseOhioShow.com, coming at you weekly with your dose of what? Common sense. We are brought to you by Harper Plus Accounting, where you not only can get your tax returns done, that part is understood, but we're talking about the real stuff where the real magic is made is when you're planning for your taxes. So when you show up on April 15th to H&R Block with all your folder full of documents, much like Norm at the table here with his paper chase, and they tell you owe thousands and thousands of dollars, you will be shocked. But not at Harper Plus. They tell you, they help you, they plan with you so you know what to expect, not only on April 15th, but at every other major tax deadline. You're going to know what you should pay for your quarterly estimates, whether you should even do your quarterly estimates, whether you should do them monthly or quarterly or both, whether you should set back money in advance so the government doesn't get it too long, or whether you should pay it up front so the government doesn't have it too short. They know what to do. They know how to help. Harper Plus Accounting, my accountant, it could be yours. So they are sponsoring Common Sense Ohio. And by the way, if you want to help also sponsor Common Sense Ohio, check us out, CommonSenseOhioShow.com. Send us a note, and we can showcase your business too. I love Harper Plus, but there's room for more, and we have segments that can be sponsored.
You give us a bigger coffee mug. I mean, I've got this one with an H, but it could be bigger.
It could be bigger,
and like a big thing you get at the gas stations that are
the big gulp,
the big gulp, and just plopping right in front of us.
Yeah,
exactly.
There you go. Yeah. So, what is Common Sense Ohio? Just briefly, we are coming at you right from the middle of Ohio, talking about all sorts of issues: political, factual, legal, sometimes with just fun, and putting a little common sense spin on it because, let's face it, folks, common sense is lacking everywhere these days. With that, Norm, actually, let's do the World War II fact of the day. For those who have been following, we've got this day in World War II. And just so everybody understands why I do this, because back when I was back in the 90s, when they used to have things called newspapers, we actually had two in Columbus. One was the Citizens Journal, and the other was the Columbus Dispatch.
That's right.
And there was even a free one, like a downtowner kind of thing.
I think that's still around, but the other paper still comes around. It's
other paper, that's
but the old CJ would come out at 5 o'clock, I think, on in the evening, and the Columbus Dispatch would come, and that would be the morning paper. But this day in history, or this day in World War II, every single day is what the Dispatch ran, and I just started reading it. So I thought that'd be interesting if we do that here. So a hat tip to the Dispatch. It used to be a newspaper.
Yeah. Sorry, staff, but yes, it did.
Yeah. So
now you line your litter box with it because it's not a newspaper. I don't know what it is.
No.
That's right. Well, that's why people are subscribing in droves to our show.
Yeah.
They should. Absolutely.
But the most important World War II fact of the day in December 1, 1942, of the list of ration items to the U.S., the things that we were rationing, coffee, which,
wow.
So I think what they're saying is coffee joins the list of rationed items in the U.S., meaning there was less of it to go around, so people had to tighten their coffee belts a little bit. Or maybe they mean that the soldiers were getting more of it, which would be great because
that was probably it. We don't grow coffee here.
We don't, right.
So wherever that was coming from, you're talking about broken lines of shipment and because of the war. So
merchantmen were getting sunk regularly off the Atlantic doing that transit from South America to North America because they would be silhouetted against the lights of the cities on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah.
And the Germans were they were sinking freighter after freighter full of oil, coffee, you name it. So I can understand why it got, And
that probably was when the turn of instant coffee came into play.
Yeah, it might.
I think it was.
Or as the Germans called it, ersatz coffee.
Yeah,
fake coffee.
Right. I think that is because of that. It was the manipulation of it being instant. You use less of it.
Steve. The other big thing that was happening, December 1, 1942, was Hitler was ready to lose the Sixth Army in Stalingrad. They were basically they had like 3 weeks to go.
Yeah, he attacked late fall, meaning that they had to invade the coldest place on the planet. at that time.
And then he cut his own army off.
And
he said, fight to the last man. I expect you all to die.
And what's interesting, there's a couple other things we'll talk about this day in World War II. But following up on what you're saying, he didn't supply his soldiers with the kind of cold weather gear that they needed. And it was more important for them to have like the boots that clicked on the concrete and sounded really cool. But there was steel in those, and that caused their feet to freeze. And, there's lots of other little stupid mistakes that the Germans, which is ironic because they were so good at so many things. But like a couple of these little decisions that Hitler made that turned out to be enormous catastrophes for them.
And it's not like he didn't have history to guide him. So I saw the recent Napoleon movie.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So Napoleon marched 460. He marched 460 men to Moscow. He came back with 40,000.
Yeah, I mean, why would anybody think that it wouldn't fail in 1942 in the same thing? Right?
Same thing. Right. It was lack of winter provisions and clothing.
And
it was exactly the same thing.
And fighting in an environment and terrain that I think is underestimated. Well, clearly underestimated every time. But can you imagine? Like it gets bitter. I mean, we're talking like cold.
18 below.
Like
freezing.
Yeah. Like you're outside, you die cold.
You never warm up.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You just don't.
And the Soviet soldiers had felt boots, overboots made of felt. And, they were well aware, the Siberians, were well aware.
They had survived in that environment for 1,000 years or however long. Yeah. So it was a huge folly. Another big folly of Hitler is stopping at the English Channel and letting and letting Britain escape.
Dunkirk.
Or Dunkirk, sorry. Yeah.
No, you had it.
I couldn't come up with the name Dunkirk. But and there's really no great explanation for that. I think people surmised that Hitler thought he could make peace with Churchill at some point. Or Britain at some point,
right?
And never did. I mean, just a couple of weird things like that. We're probably speaking German.
He wasn't thinking like Hamas, like okay, wipe most of them out, but take a bunch prisoner, and then soldiers. You've got leverage.
Yeah, these were soldiers. They could have bagged the entire British army,
exactly,
or at least a good chunk of it,
right? And just held them in prison and basically negotiate with Churchill to, you want your guys back or not?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But
then listening to Goering about the Air Force being able to conquer Britain,
right.
In the air, and didn't obviously fail.
They will never bomb Berlin. If they do bomb Berlin, you can call me Meyer.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So also in
if you guys find yourself in Volgograd, which is the new name for Stalingrad, there is one hell of a World War II museum there.
Oh, is it?
Really?
Oh,
yeah. So I've been there on my charity rally through Russia. Which a lot of stories about that, which we don't need to get into today, but some really interesting stuff culturally about how Russia works versus the United States. It's just a lot there. We could do a whole show.
We probably could. Cool. And then, so also on December 1st, probably more important to the United States and what we're doing here is that the Japanese fixed the date of December 7th. So they decided that in 6 days from now, they would attack Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
Changed their codes, did a bunch of stuff that basically blinded us to what they were doing. And then the day that lived in infamy was next Thursday.
I mean, other than the Trojan horse, right? Pearl Harbor is probably the most spectacular surprise attack in world history. It's unbelievable what they pulled off.
Well, the Twin Towers.
Twin Towers, another one.
That was a Trojan.
That was the modern Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, well, Twin Towers, and then the Hamas attacking Israel recently. That was
crazy.
That came out of nowhere,
right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's not a surprise attack, but what we pulled off in D-Day was pretty significant too.
Yes, right.
Pretty all interesting tidbits of history, but. I guess it's probably time to move on to the real purpose of Common Sense Ohio. What do you got today?
Well, so everybody knows Steve Palmer is a renowned defense attorney here in Ohio. And I think this particular bill that's moving through the Ohio General Assembly, it's House Bill 161. It has passed the House, and now the House sponsors are doing their testimony to the Senate to get the Senate to pass this. There was only one vote against this bill, and it was a Republican from Xenia. But what is the bill? The bill ends spousal immunity to rape charges, even when there is no violence, even when there is no threat or coercion. And I am seeing a lot of now I get it, right? Men should not ever rape anybody, right, including their wives. So yes, and that is in existing Ohio law. Existing Ohio law outlaws violent rape against your spouse already.
Yeah, forcible rape.
Forcible rape. But what this bill will do will take away the general immunity to such charges inside of a marriage. And dude, I don't want to be the contra guy that everybody says, oh, Norm's pro-rape. No, I'm not. But I see enormous problems with this, especially in divorce court, is where I see potential for abuse of very unhappy wives and maybe a few husbands. I don't know how.
Sure.
But
it happens the other way around too.
Accusing somebody of rape in order to gain an advantage in domestic relations.
Yeah, that's one of those pieces of legislation that they've got to think it out.
Yeah, it sounds good.
The next step. What can happen? Steve has brought up a lot of times.
Yeah, go, Steve.
Wow. So the current rape statute is codified in Ohio Revised Code Section 2907.02. In Section A1, no person shall engage in sexual conduct. Now, sexual conduct in Ohio means sex, penetrative sex of not just vaginal, but also oral or anal. Sexual conduct with another who is not the spouse of the offender or who is the spouse of the offender, but is living separate and apart from the offender when any of the following applies. So you can't commit rape if you're the spouse. Here's what they're talking about. For the purpose of preventing resistance, the offender substantially impaired the other person's judgment or control by administering any drug, intoxicant, or controlled substance to the person surreptitiously or by force or threat of force. So, in other words, if your spouse is drunk and you engage in a little hanky-panky, that's not rape. The other person is less than 13 years of age, whether or not the offender knows the age of the person. So if you're married and to somebody under 13, I guess. And the other person's ability to resist or consent is substantially impaired because of a mental or physical condition or because of advanced age, or the offender knows or has reasonable cause to believe the other person's ability to resist or consent is substantially impaired because of a mental or physical condition or because of advanced age. All right, so none of this says that if you're the spouse, you're allowed to have forcible, non-consensual sex.
It's already illegal.
That Section 2 covers that. No person shall engage in sexual conduct with another when the offender purposely compels the other person to submit by force or threat of force. All right, so that's forcible rape. That's what most people think about rape. You cannot do that to your spouse.
That's right.
Because that covers marriage.
That covers
right there.
Yeah, that's everybody.
That's everybody.
Now, what they exempt from marriage is like if you're asleep or if you're drunk.
That's right.
And,
have a few glasses of wine. The husband takes advantage. He thinks maybe she's okay with it. Maybe she's awake. Maybe she's not.
But it's not just the husband. Women do this too.
Sure.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Correct.
So if you're the guy and your lady's been out on a girls' night out and takes the Uber home and, has had way too many apple teenies and climbs aboard, that theoretically now would be rape.
Yeah.
I'll just let that linger out there. That's rape, ladies.
Yeah.
And you could be prosecuted and thrown in prison for 10 years, 11 years actually, up to 11 years. You would be placed on a sex offender registry and all sorts of horrible things would come. But I think, now is that likely to happen? I think not. But I think your concern, Norm, is exactly what I would be thinking. It's like, imagine the abuse of this in domestic relations court.
Come on, man. It's going to be off the hook.
So why introduce this when you have that already on the books?
That's my question.
This has been politically incorrect for years. Everybody's like, I can't believe that you can't rape your spouse. Well, you can. You just can't do it this way.
Yeah.
And it's there's probably I'd like to see how artfully it's written because I could see
because they're trying to clarify a bit more, maybe drilling down a little bit more.
You can't. I would be all in favor of a law that says you can't intentionally drug your spouse in order to have your way with them or her.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Of course.
So there's probably an artful way to write this that satisfies everybody's concern, and maybe that's what they've done. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what it says.
Yeah.
Well, very good.
Wow.
Another bill that's moving through the General Assembly, which I don't think it goes far enough, but it's a step in the right direction, is a property tax relief bill, House Bill 187. And this is to cause county auditors to, when they do their valuation on your property, to use a 3-year average rather than what is happening for us in Licking County and over in Madison County and other counties where they're building huge new gigantic mega, industry. And all of a sudden, the little widower in her, the widow in her house, her $100,000 farm lit goes from $100,000 to being valued at $1 million, and now her tax bill is several times higher than what it used to be, and basically her Social Security and her savings can't cover it, and she's out the door. So what they're trying to do is, rather than shock her with a 1-year gigantic leap in valuation, have to average it against 3 years. Personally, I don't think it goes far enough. I think basically if you live in one of these areas before the project comes in, I don't think it should affect your real estate taxes
until the house is sold. And then it kicks in.
Ties into it.
Totally,
that's right.
Totally agree.
It should be grandfathered because you're having people in very low-income rural areas all of a sudden have to deal.
That's not what they're saying. Look what Biden said. There was nothing going on in Johnstown, Ohio.
Exactly.
Nothing was there. Nobody was there. We're just going to. So what you've really done is take nothing and put all these people, by.
They're gentrifying the place, honestly.
They're constructively evicting people.
That's right. That is the best way.
We're going to raise your property rates or property values so high so quickly that there's no way you can afford it because you're on a fixed income. And by the way, Biden, you screwed up the inflation so much that your fixed income now is worth about 30% less than it was 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, so now we're going to add taxes to the equation. And
it's going to kill people.
But it looks good. It sounds good.
It will literally kill people because when you take an 85-year-old widow out of her house and say, okay, you can't afford to be here, Mom. You're going to go to a nursing home. A lot of them check out. A lot of them just die. Right. Because it's a shock to their system.
Because they wanted to die in that home.
They wanted to live out their life
exactly
in the old farmstead. Yeah. Now, I have talked to some of these real estate guys that, and these are private investors, and what they'll do, and it sounds like, to me, it sounds like a vulture circling, but what they'll do and make themselves feel like, they're coming to the rescue of these old ladies is they will give them a life tenancy on the property. So they'll buy the property. Yeah. They'll pay her back bill. They'll say, you get to live here for the rest of your life or until you decide to move. And they'll buy the basically.
It's a glorified reverse mortgage. That's what it is.
That's what it is. And what they've done is basically destroyed generational wealth.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, what they've done is destroyed generational wealth.
So it's I don't know where it's going to end up. It's in its infancy, but House Bill 187, maybe some relief. The other bit of Ohio news I have, guys, and this is just kind of a seasonal thing. There's always one of these auto shops or body shops that suddenly blow up this time of year. And it's because a lot of times what they do.
I didn't know that was a traditional thing.
Oh, it is. It is.
I had no idea.
So the season to blow up your auto shop.
So in Hillsboro, Ohio, this week, 3 guys died in this.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at somebody dying. I don't mean that.
It happens every year, and it is almost like the indoor kerosene things, that catch on fire in the Near East Side or whatever. Down in Cincinnati, the over the Rhine, people supplementing their heat with those stupid electric things or a kerosene thing, and then everybody dies from asphyxiation or whatever, carbon monoxide. So what happens in these body shops is they use these chemicals, right? They get down low on the pavement inside the shop, and then they have an open flame. They're either doing some welding,
a settling torch or something,
or they've got a hot water heater that's gas fired. And they forget, right, that they're working with explosive solvents. Boom.
And because all the garage doors are being closed because of colder weather.
Because it's cold. Exactly.
Speaking of explosive situations, has anybody at this table or in this studio parked in the back in space number 12?
No, I have not.
Well, I think we have a trespass parker.
Oh, today?
Yeah, right now. So I just want to make sure that nobody in our show is getting towed.
I'm
No. I'm elsewhere. That's not me.
Fair enough.
Well, I got some Ohio focus.
Oh,
too.
go, man.
And
Go.
all three of us will relate to this because we felt the pain of having to take these tests and seeing our kids take these tests. That the ACT and SAT test requirements are going away slowly.
Yeah.
I love it. I thought that is such a money grab and serves no purpose.
I don't know what to think of it.
I'm torn on standardized tests.
I think it could be a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole thing. And I like that universities are looking at it holistically, that what else are they doing beyond that? Because, and when I walked into it, hearing this from both my kids, that ACT and SAT, going into it, they said, you will have to take this test 2 or 3 times.
Right. And it's terrible.
That's a red fucking flag.
Well, and
you have to take this test 3 times, and it's a 4-hour ordeal.
I get it. It is terrifying. The only thing is about it, Brett, is when you have a disparate incoming collegiate class that you're considering for admission. Say you're the admissions officer at Cleveland State, and you've got all of these applications. What standard do you have to judge across all of them, the whole spectrum of applications?
You figure it out. I'm serious. That's the job. That's any job, any corporation that hires people.
I'm with you, but this is the problem. To be replaced with what would be the question I would ask rhetorically.
Right.
And here's what's going to happen. I don't know this to be true or for sure, but I've got a hunch that standardized testing came into being because of a fear of adverse or disparate impact on races, on genders,
probably so.
Exactly.
And bias.
Sure.
All right. So you want to eliminate racism. We're going to make it all standardized. Well, then what happens is they said, well, certain races and certain genders and certain ethnic origins perform worse on standardized tests than others. So that became a problem. And now we're back to the same problem that we started with, which is now we're going to have to ask people to actually do their job, to screen candidates, to determine whether, despite a GPA or a grade point average that might be a little bit less, somebody has other qualifications that make them a great candidate for college.
They were a huge volunteer in their community. They did lots of other, and I love that big. I love that big picture.
Or maybe daddy or grandfather gave enough money to name a stadium after him, so they can let him in for that reason.
Right.
That's going to happen. That's going to happen outside of ACT and SAT. All those may be
legitimate reasons. All those might be legitimate.
Yeah.
Now, my dad used to run at one point. I just had breakfast with him last week. It was his birthday, 90th. And he said when he was on the the law school admissions committee, he looked for people with no more than like a 3-point who had played small college athletics or maybe even big college athletics, men and women both. He didn't care. And I would guess there's probably more guys because more guys were applying to law school back in those days anyway. But and the idea was, look, these people are obviously hard workers. They're committed. They've got lots of stuff going on in their lives. They've been classic, maybe underachievers, but they've got huge potential because they had enough wherewithal to show up at college athletics for 4 years at a situation where they weren't getting paid to do it. And by getting paid, I mean no scholarships.
Right.
And, and it's no secret that was also his background. He went to Oberlin and played Division III athletics.
But
I went to College of Worcester
he has
and played
knowledge
Division III
about
athletics.
it.
Right.
But he has knowledge of it, though.
And it was right. All the guys I went to college with, we all were like solid 3s or 2 8s or 2 9s. But everybody I know that I played football with is very successful now. We figured out we had lots of, I don't know what it was, but we were all done quite well.
Well, not afraid to work hard.
Right. Maybe
and, work and that's
or
why.
Commitment
I mean, we've had a rash of veteran people come in here as guests of this show, and a lot of them are not college graduates, but they're successful in life because they're not afraid to put in the work.
Put in the work, or they think a little bit differently. Now, about your standardized test, Brett, I'm terrible. My ACT
I was
score
going to go there too.
A solid 23.
Listen, guys, I get all
people
that.
That do terrible on tests.
The people this is going to screw are the people that to not have a standardized test of some kind is going to screw the people that want to come in to a university and be judged on their merit.
Well,
meaning their scholastic merit. And so we just had a big lawsuit found in favor of the Chinese and the Indian students at Harvard and Yale. Big decision. Supreme Court smacked the universities down and said, no, you can't use race. You've got to use some kind of
Some objective
standard
criteria, right?
And now we're not going to have that.
Well, so I would think that there's probably a middle ground. There's probably a middle ground where you can rely on standardized testing, but it had become the end-all be-all because we went through this phase where the only thing that mattered was your standardized test, because then nobody had to do their job. Nobody had to say, well, I'm going to pick this person, even though this person didn't do so well because of X, Y, Z.
Right.
And they were afraid maybe of getting labeled a racist or labeled whatever, or being accused of nepotism. So they were just, it became, all right, so the policy is we start with test scores. And if you don't have a certain test score, you don't get in. And then everything else went out the window. Now that's gone too far. But I think it's probably a measure too far to get rid of the testing altogether. There's probably a better way to do it.
And I believe it's a lessening of focus on that.
Yeah.
It's a holistic look at it, because I know.
But if they're ending it, Brett, then there isn't going to be.
I don't think it's not going to end.
No.
Well, first of all, it's never going to end because ACT and SAT is way too much of a moneymaker.
Right,
They will
study
stay in there.
stuff.
I think a lot of, and I think it's more of a holistic look. Okay, take the test, but we're not going to focus on that completely. It's a holistic look.
Well,
what did you do with your grades?
That's a fair assessment.
I think it is too.
But I thought the news item was they're going to eliminate that.
No, it's less of a focus. It's a less of a
certain
focus.
schools,
I may have led that way, and I didn't mean to.
certain schools are doing just that, though. Certain
Yeah, they
schools
are.
completely eliminating the requirement for an ACT or SAT in order to gain admission.
Because of COVID. That's how that started.
And let's talk about some adverse consequences of that decision. So, if for me in particular, if I were out of my high school trying to apply to a school like Harvard or Yale, and I'm talking back when they were real schools.
Yeah, right.
I'm not saying they're not now, but they're not the same now.
They're not the
So-
they're not the
But
same.
I don't think I think it would have been doing me a great disservice to stick me in a group of individuals who had different preparatory background than I did.
Sure.
I went to Big Walnut High School. I loved the place. I learned a lot there.
Yeah, great schools.
But some of my colleagues at the College of Worcester clearly had an advantage over me. It was an obvious advantage mathematically.
Sure.
And maybe I could have taken advantage of more math when I was at high school.
Sure.
And it's not that it wasn't there. It's that it wasn't incentivized for me.
Right.
And you could blame my parents, or you could blame the school, or you could blame all sorts of things. But I wasn't as qualified as others there. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd have been thrown into an environment where I'd probably been blown away. I had to drop out of math as it was, and there's other reasons for that. But it's like you maybe not be doing people a service by sticking them when they're unqualified with other people who are more qualified.
Right.
And look, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I've never been the smartest guy in the room. I totally and freely admit that now.
Yes.
I may not have been able to do that when I was 17 or 18, to know that I didn't belong in certain academic environments because I couldn't excel there.
Right.
And that may not be a real popular opinion, but it sort of makes sense to me.
No, it does.
No, I think it's actually very mature not to think that you're the smartest person in the room. When you know the kind of people that I'm talking about, where they just think that they've got it, and you can't even discuss anything with them,
right?
Because they know everything.
Well, those are know-it-alls, but I'm talking like people who truly have it. Like
gifted people.
Gifted people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's got to be like I can't compete in that world academic. I compete in that world. I can compete in all sorts of other worlds that they don't hold a candle to me.
Right.
Right. So they couldn't play Division III football. I could.
Right. But gifted people often make very big mistakes because they
don't mean they have an advantage.
Because they don't prep. A lot of them don't prep. They I got this. I know that case.
It's very tunnel vision. And
then you pop into court and you've got something hot off the press, like, whoa, court.
Well, it's not even prep, but maybe I can come into court and I've got a better communication skills.
Right.
But I couldn't do maybe I couldn't get an A or get a 100% on my LSAT law school admittance exam. Now, and I've always thought the person who is most impressive to me is the person who can play in both worlds. So I've got a very close friend. He's a Mensa guy. He's a genius. He was a football player. He was a whiz at math. He was a whiz at anything he ever did, sort of academically.
Yeah.
But he spoke both languages. So he wasn't just a relegated guy who could only do that in a corner of a cubicle in like a computer programming house.
Yeah. A Fran Tarkenton, a guy like that, Roger Staubach, guys that are gifted across a spectrum.
Yes, the
of
all
things.
rounder, but like elevated all round.
Yeah.
Like most of the all rounders, you like in my vision is like, all right, you're pretty good at a lot of stuff, but you're not great at anything.
Yeah.
He was great at almost everything. It's
Kenny Anderson got a law degree.
Yeah.
Bengals quarterback Chris Collinsworth got a law degree.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't ascribe law degree to any intellect.
oh no, I don't.
At the table,
I know. We got two of us, and
but it's a dedication to doing it, though.
One of us is a
any
numbnut.
degree is a dedication to doing it.
Well, what's interesting is this: my LSAT score, this is the law school admittance exam.
Yeah,
I was in the solid 50th percentile, maybe 53rd percentile, which is extremely low for the LSAT.
That's right.
That gets you into like the lowest tier schools,
or
only,
doesn't get you in,
or doesn't get you in
at all.
And then when I got to law school, I decided that I was going to read. If they said read it, I read it.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, if they said read it, I read it. And if I didn't understand what I was reading, I looked it up and I read it again.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for like the first semester or two, or maybe a year and a half. And then I got all A's. And at least in my case,
You put in the work.
the law school admittance exam reflected nothing on my ability to be a lawyer.
And your example right there goes to
Yeah.
this.
Right.
If you're not pulling in the 28, 29s or whatever the
But I
top
got
number
in.
is for ACTs, you still did it.
But I got in
Yeah.
to a lower tier law school, or standard wise, and I excelled there. Now I don't know and law school is one of those places that's always on a curve. At least it was when I was there. So my grade is irrelevant unless it's compared to yours.
Okay.
That's right.
It really
Yeah, that's
how was,
true.
May I
That's
ask,
true.
how was your GPA? Was it pretty good?
in law school.
No, your GPA from college applying to law school.
It's like a rounded up 3 point.
Okay.
So maybe like a 2.9-ish.
Gotcha.
That I would have rounded.
So you were
it
a
up.
B+ student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately,
My dad says that my dad, the former judge,
Yeah.
he used to always say the B student lawyers, best lawyers.
I was just
He
going to
said that all the time.
There is a place for that type of lawyer in our society. We need the Steve Palmers of the world.
Dad said,
if you know what I mean.
they were the best lawyers.
Right.
He said the A+ lawyers, just not as good.
Well,
just
I've
not
always
as good.
said, look, and it's going to sound sort of condescending. I don't mean it that way. I've always said my law practice in my life, I can hire the eggheads. And I mean that with respect. I mean, I can hire the people that are better, that are smarter than I am in a certain place
Right.
to do what I need to have done.
Right.
But a lot of times they can't do what I do, which is decide what needs to be done.
Right.
And
That executive function.
right, it's a different level
Yes.
of. It's not one that's better than other. It's just different.
It's different.
And that's why, like the eggheads don't run corporations.
No.
Generally speaking,
Right.
You know, they're pigeonholed and they're great at what they do, and it's a singular focus, like the engineers who put people on the moon. You know, it's like we need that. And
That's right.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
I
Right.
cannot do it. But they also can't do what I do. And my dad also said of lawyers, Norm, go to law school because when you get done, one, it's a great education. It teaches you how to think in life and how to find out answers in life, which is true.
That's why I went to law school. I was going to be a journalist. I never was going to be a lawyer.
But you learn how to think and solve problems.
That's right.
It creates a framework that you can operate in for your life.
Right.
And then the other thing he always said is that I can do almost what everybody else can do as a lawyer. So I can do accounting, I can do MBA type stuff, I can do all this other stuff, but they can't do what I do, almost by definition, because you have to pass the bar exam and have a credential. Now with accounting, that's sort of the same, but he always meant that we can learn to do what other people do because of our education.
That's right.
But the other side, it's not reversed. Now, some of that I don't think is true, but some of it is. You know, there's a little bit of truth in what he used to say. But,
Yeah.
and now it costs too much, so don't go to law school.
Yeah, the cost of law school should be going down because, frankly, you could do it online. I don't understand why you
Really?
even need to go
Yeah,
to
I disagree with that.
Okay, that's cool. But
I disagree with that. I think if you're going
let's
to learn
hope
how to be a
not.
lawyer, I still believe.
well, if you're going to learn to be a lawyer, see, I went to law school not to learn to be a lawyer.
Well, look, you did.
I went
You
for all
learned
the
to-
other
You learned to
reasons.
think like a lawyer, and in order to think like a lawyer, you've got to be subjected to the Socratic method of teaching.
Right.
And I don't think that online, even Zoom, would
No,
duplicate that.
I get that. I get
You've
that.
got to be called on in class and terrified.
Sure.
And
Right.
and only then are you broken down to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
I get it. Other than
it absorbs.
moot court, however, there is no. I mean, if you could do a Zoom meeting where the Socratic method could engender the same kind of terror that you're talking about for an unprepared law school student, then I'm with you. But probably it can't.
You probably can't.
Because
not the same. You can hide
that
it.
social pressure when you've got 35 of your classmates enveloping you and you're the target. And he goes, well, Mr. Murdock, tell us about Jones v. Smith. Explicate the case and give us both sides. And you haven't read the damn thing. It's your ass.
It's your ass. And that teaches you something.
That teaches you something, right?
Yeah.
And if you haven't read it and you've been skimming it while the class is going on, it teaches you how to do that.
That's right.
And I mean that with sincerity. It's not just that you're not prepared. It's how to get prepared really quickly when you're not prepared. It's how to wing it when you need to be, when you have to wing it.
And that's life.
Well,
that's life.
And in those
Problem
cases,
solving.
I bounce back to the professor. Well, you assigned pages 155 to 195, and that case isn't between those two page numbers. Well, is that what you think legal education's all about, Mr. Murdock? So it's that kind of colloquy back and forth
you learn how to argue.
that totally destroys your preconceptions of fairness and preparedness and how to get through life, right? That you're going to be subjected to all kinds of ridiculous.
Terrorizing.
That's terrorizing. Right.
Terrorizing.
Right.
And they want to eliminate that in law schools, and it's a shame. It's a shame because look, we're caught. It's give everybody a trophy, make them all feel warm and fuzzy, and give them a little law degree at the end, and it's terrorizing.
Yeah.
The other thing is interesting is that I think what you were going to say is it really has nothing to do with being a lawyer. So when I was woefully underprepared by law school. Now I was prepared because I worked for a small law firm
As a clerk.
Right. I was otherwise woefully underprepared to run a business and actually make a living being a lawyer.
Right.
I could read cases.
Oh, the secretaries at my law firm were way more hip to what's going on than I was.
Yeah.
I mean, they would say, well, go to the second floor, room 206, ask for Bill.
Yeah, they knew the people.
And you're like, holy shit, why don't
you
you
get stuff
practice
done.
law? You know more than the partners here at the firm. You know exactly who to go to and what form. I'll type it up for you, Norm. Get on your motorcycle, run down to the courthouse and file this son of a bitch. And you're like, okay, Mary. Do you want to write the brief too?
I learned more from the old school legal secretaries than I did anywhere else on how to run a law practice.
Yeah, right.
To this day, every dollar I make, 33 cents goes into a savings account. To this day, I've started my practice that way. Day one, the first dollar, that's what I did, and I still do it. And that way I've never have a problem with taxes. And that's because an old school legal secretary told me that when I first hung my shingle in 1995, November.
Yeah, they are fantastic. And I'm sure every executive assistant listening to this is going to ask their boss for a raise tomorrow.
Hey, I do that. Common Sense Ohio says I need a raise. He's like, oh, boy.
Well, a couple of big things. Our congressman here from Central Ohio, Jim Jordan, as you know, is chairman of the Weaponization of Government Committee. And he brought on Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger this week. And these are two lefty journalists. And both of them are ringing the alarm bell once again about the Twitter files and now new files from something called the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, made up of over 100 different governments around the world and NGOs. And this was started in 2018 in response to Brexit in the UK and in response, frankly, to President Trump, who was halfway through his term at that point. And what this so a whistleblower came forward, disgorged all this information, and what the CTIL, the Cyber Threat Intel League, has promulgated is a coordination of what sorts of threads on social networks and on traditional networks should be allowed to exist. And we're talking about everything from COVID to robots to AI, whatever the subject is. The narrative is now being coordinated across the globe by this organization, and pretty scary stuff vis-a-vis our First Amendment rights. Because then what do? They go to social media, and this is the part that's come out. They go to social media like Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, and Google, and they ask for certain outcomes on accounts. So, for example, what came out in the questioning with Dan Goldman, a Democrat congressman on the committee, he asked Schellenberger and Taibbi, well, if you take 100% of these requests made by the CTIL to squelch or edit out or censor these people, they only did it 35% of the time. And so these journalists, now these are great. Now these are lefties, right? But even they get it. I mean, they are leading the charge. They said, well, then using that logic, so do we have 35% of our constitutional rights? Like if I have a 3-story house, do I have to allow soldiers to be quartered in the first story, but the second and third story I get to keep? I mean, what kind of mindset would say that 35% of excluding people's expressions online is conforming to the First Amendment?
This is
it's
lunacy.
Bizarre.
I mean, like anybody who read we read 1984. Right. And
Right.
It was mandatory reading. And they had like these ministries. And one of them was the Ministry of Truth, where the government, some organization got to determine what the truth was and basically censor everything else out.
Yeah.
And that's what this is.
That's what this is.
That's what this is.
I kind of wonder if people will read 1984 and they go, that's a great idea. We should do that versus what the world could become.
Well, Mr.
You almost feel that
no,
way.
Brett,
don't
you're right on top. Mr.
It's like, this is the game plan. Let's do this.
Dude, you're right on it.
My God.
Goldman called that 35%. He said, well, that's reasonable. They didn't censor 100%. They only censored about a third. And these guys are looking back at him like, dude. So like the 10 Commandments, you would say like the government could
the
take
first 3, let's wipe out.
or the first 3 Bill of Rights, or the first 3. Like
it's only a third of them.
Yeah,
it's only a third. You still got 66% left.
What kind of mentality?
And when's the last time the government stopped at a third?
Never.
10%. Once you start giving it,
right.
they keep grabbing the rope until it's gone.
Well, let's do the Second Amendment like this. We'll take every third weapon away from you.
Yeah.
This is my classic argument. I always hear this all the time. You brought up Second Amendment, and it's perfect segue because I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking what you were getting at is everybody always says, it's not like when they're arguing about Second Amendment, everybody always argues, well, it's not like we don't also censor speech. And, there's all sorts of restrictions on freedom of speech, like in schools and this and that and the other. You can't do those things. No hate speech, blah, 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 blah. And then they use that as a justification to take away Second Amendment rights. And I'm like, listen, I don't agree with the First Amendment rights being taken away.
Right.
And so now it's like it's already bad. So you're going to use the bad precedent to create more bad precedent.
Right.
That's what happens. You get accustomed to this deprivation of freedom, and then they take more. And then you get accustomed to that, and then they take more. This is incrementalism, and incrementally it is gone. It won't take long before it's gone. So right now it's a third, and they're going to say, well, that's okay, and next time it'll only be 40%. That was only 40%.
Let's experiment with 40. 40
Right.
It worked. Yeah, let's do it.
It's not like they took all of it, and pretty soon it'll be 70% or 80%. And, that's what they do.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because that's what happens when you give people power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
And I think anything that calls themselves a league. You got to watch.
A league is like naming a law after somebody.
A
right?
league. Give me a break.
As if you know what it is? It's taking like these individuals with political self-interest and then creating a league out of them as if somehow that sanitizes, like it's for everybody instead of just their individual
So
interest.
this Schellenberger guy, you guys might remember, he is the wild man. I shouldn't call him. He's actually a very reasonable guy, but he's the guy that took on Gavin Newsom. He ran in the Democrat primary for governor, and he was like the only competition Newsom had. He is also the author who has exposed a lot of the fake environmental greeniness stuff. The stuff that makes no sense. Like we're creating more pollution to do all this electrification than if you just let things happen with market forces. Let people make their own choices. So Schellenberger is a great example of, if you will, the classic kind of liberal.
Right. He would be a guest at the table. He would fit right in here.
He would fit
use
right
a little
in.
bit of dose of common sense to his viewpoints on life.
Yeah.
All right.
I urge people to Google or DuckDuckGo Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi. These guys, Matt Taibbi used to write for Rolling Stone, and now he's persona non grata there. And he's a guy that came out with all this Twitter stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
right? And he's just saying, hey, these are the facts.
I looked at, everybody sees these sort of shorts or reels or videos on social media where guys go around college campuses and asking kids questions.
Yeah, Steve Crowder.
And Crowder does it, but there's a bunch of other people that do it. And I don't know who was doing this. I just happened to see one where they were going around and talking to students and asking them, when's the last time a conservative ever prevented a liberal from speaking? And it was about that quiet.
Yeah.
It was crickets.
Wow, what a question.
So it's like, you bring a conservative speaker on campus and then the liberals go crazy, or the people go crazy and have protests and do it.
Right.
They try to reverse it. Like, when's the last time a conservative group tried to prevent a liberal speaker from sending out or portraying their message or purveying their message? Mm-hmm. And nobody had any example of it. Ever.
Right.
And people were scratching their head. It was sort of like that's interesting. I even stopped for a second. I was like, that's an interesting way to look at it.
It is. It is definitely. And in this vein, this week in the January 6th Trump trial, it has come out. So there have been secret subpoenas. And this subpoena was issued, I think it's a 14-page subpoena, and about 8 pages of it have been redacted. But the parts that are not redacted for the public indicate that Jack Smith has requested demanded, subpoenaed of Twitter, and there's like a $350,000 per day violation penalty until they comply. He wants Twitter to disgorge out of the 80+ million followers of Trump, every single Twitter account who has ever retweeted, liked, followed, unfollowed, muted, or blocked Donald Trump. I mean, wow, really?
Wow. That's the spectrum.
I mean,
that's the complete spectrum then.
It's just unbelievable.
What are they going to do with that information?
And
I don't know. It's unbelievable to me. It's almost like he just is trying to punish Musk for owning Twitter.
that's because if he's going from unfollow all the way to retweet, that's the spectrum.
That's the whole spec. Anybody who's involved,
it.
He wants to know anybody who was involved in Trump's Twitter account, including, of course, all his direct messaging and all that.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just
government.
unbelievable.
I did this research not that long ago for somebody, and it was in the context of a gun manufacturer investigation. And the DEA has been sending out, or Department of Justice has been sending out subpoenas. And they've been sending out subpoenas to like small gun makers. And they say,
This is not the ATF. This is the DEA.
I said DEA. I misspoke. The ATF and Department of Justice.
Yeah.
They're sending out investigatory subpoenas, grand jury subpoenas.
Okay.
For information about gun parts and to whom they're being sold, how much they paid, and identities of people buying them.
Wow.
And they're going to these private manufacturers. So, there's an old saw in my head that is like, if they want to subpoena you, their subpoena power has no limit. And my research basically confirmed that. The government's subpoena power, the federal government's subpoena power for a grand jury subpoena investigation is virtually limitless. And they can just do it because, companies will hire me like, look, our customers are going to be saying, this is crazy. Why are you giving out this information to the government? Because look, if I buy a gun part, I don't want the government knowing I did that. And I don't even know why I don't want the government knowing. I just don't.
A gun part, most gun parts, until you have a certain number of components.
Like uppers or receivers.
It's not a firearm. It's not regulated.
Well, it can be a firearm if it's stamped. That's
right.
Crazy.
Certain assemblies.
A hunk of metal can become a gun even though it doesn't do anything.
But let's suppose I just want to buy a replacement front sight. Let's take something like a front sight.
Yeah.
Just a little piece of metal with a tip.
They're
right?
subpoenaing that kind of stuff.
And it's not a firearm. Like ATF should have no interest in who is buying.
The government is investigating this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're sending out subpoenas, and they're I don't know what the purpose is, but there's this is the stuff that goes on that people don't connect the dots. And I've always said there's a way to connect the dots to form a conspiracy theory. And there's a way to connect the dots that is just like government chaos. And it's probably a little bit of both. Yeah. And all of it is based upon this deprivation of information. Like, we don't know what's going on, and they're not telling us what's going on. That comes back to this free speech component to it. Like,
so what a lot of these tinfoil hat guys are doing, and they're probably smart to do it. And maybe I'm dumb, but I still will buy ammunition or parts or whatever to fix my guns or whatever online. Right. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people tell me they will not buy a gun or any parts or any ammunition from anybody other than a fellow citizen. Mm-hmm. They will not go to a store. They won't go to a gun show. They will not order online. They don't want any
Private sales
documentation.
only,
Get off, stay off the grid. Basically.
They don't want any documentation.
How can you blame them?
So
If you think
I
about
like to
it,
stay off the
yeah.
grid. And there is a group of people out there because of that would say that I must be doing something wrong. Like
That's right.
Like somehow I'm not participating.
They
in
would jump
government.
to that conclusion.
Yeah.
100%.
And I just and when people ask me why, it's like just because. I don't
See,
need
and
the
they
government
call
knowing what
that
I'm doing.
they call that what private
I'm
sales.
extreme.
Well, that's called the gun show loophole.
Yeah.
Right? Is when a private individual, in his garage sells a gun to his neighbor.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm done turkey shooting. I'm not going to hunt anymore.
Here, you want the shotgun?
You want the
$500,
shotgun?
it's yours.
Exactly. Right.
Yep.
And they want to make that illegal.
Yeah. And I've purchased guns that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's the only way I've heard that a lot of people are buying anymore.
How do you know
they will not go to a store
when you buy a gun that way that gun was not used in of a nefarious way?
Oh,
I
you
don't.
have no idea.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
But the reverse is the true though as well. Well, no, if you bought it from a dealer, you would know that it's a clean gun.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay.
No.
I was just curious. I've never done that before to know.
Not necessarily. So if I say
Have you
I
ever
commit
thought
a
about
murder-
that? Have you ever
say
thought
I
about-
commit a murder with a pistol, and I later go and sell that pistol to a gun shop, a pawn shop, and then you come along later and you buy it from the pawn shop.
Right.
Well, that gun's in the books.
Right.
It's registered in the books. They call it booked. It's in there. It's been Form 2 or whatever it would be. And now they know where the gun. They can trace where the gun
Sure.
went. And you don't know that gun was used in a homicide. Now it may come up later that it was. They may somehow track it back to you.
And
It's
how much of a
actually-
ringer are you in? If
None.
you have none, okay.
Oh, no,
Okay.
it's perfectly okay.
I mean, you
Brett.
know how much of an anal probe you're going
Right.
to go through because you own the gun.
Brett,
Well, they may take it from you.
let me
Okay.
give you an
I'm
example.
just curious.
There's nothing wrong legally with owning a gun that was used in a
Okay.
commission of a crime. Example, Jack Ruby's family got his revolver back from the city of Dallas, and they auctioned it off. The very revolver he used to kill Oswald.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay.
That's
You
interesting.
can own a gun that killed somebody.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got guns. Who knows?
Yeah.
That were my family inheritance type things. I don't know what the heck.
I
where those
own
things come
military
from.
guns that are from World War II.
Oh, I'm sure.
and
Well,
I'm sure they were used for all
sure.
kinds of horrible things.
Sure.
But
sure.
I don't know. I don't know where they came, where the necessary history of all those guns, and I don't know what the government's interested in those guns are, and I don't really care.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
It's
like,
a thing.
I'm not going to do anything bad with those guns.
It's like
Right.
owning a shovel to me.
Yeah.
That shovel could have been used to
Bury a body.
By the way,
I mean,
by the way,
It's just a tool.
Yeah.
my properly purchased 350 Legend rifle, which is now a deer gun in Ohio. It's a straight wall cartridge rifle.
Oh,
I bought it from Vance's.
okay.
I go up into a tree stand
Okay.
on Tuesday evening.
Okay.
And one of the biggest bucks I've ever seen in my life walks right behind me. And I've got an awesome Vortex scope on that gun. And it was still within shooting light, but it was, the end of the light.
Yeah.
And I can see him as bright as day because I've got a great scope. And I pull the trigger and it goes click.
For God's sake. What happened?
I have no idea.
Oh,
Wow.
no.
I have no idea.
Defective right from out of the box.
No, because the week before, my son during youth week shot a deer with it. So
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh, no.
Wow.
This has nothing to do with Common Sense Ohio. It's just my own frustration.
Yeah.
I have no idea
That's a shame.
why that went click. And then I tried to cycle around.
But he heard that.
Yeah, by then he was gone.
Bing.
And then two things happened. He left, the buck left, and I lost the round that went click. So I couldn't even look to see if it had a print of a firing pin.
Yeah.
It's in the woods somewhere.
Wow.
Just
Oh my
the
gosh.
craziest
Yeah.
scenario I've ever involved in. Anyway, so off to the races.
But as a nature lover, you got to see the biggest.
It was one of the best hunts I've had.
You know,
'Cause it was
so at least
awesome.
I remember my now deceased uncle talking about that. That sometimes it's that give and take of just going out to see or to kill.
Yeah.
Enjoy just
It's a thrill, man.
seeing,
It's a
just
thrill.
seeing. Yeah.
For those of us who have seen The Deer Hunter, the movie with Robert De Niro,
Yeah.
the scene where he decides, so he's a Vietnam vet, he's on a deer hunt,
up
and
in the
he
mountains.
up in the mountains, he's in Pennsylvania, it's gorgeous, and he looks at this massive racked male deer and the buck, and he just, I'm not going to shoot it.
Yeah.
And he takes his gun down and just watches it and just,
There's something to that.
That was
There
Steve's
is.
moment.
Yeah. Right.
I've
Yeah.
done that.
Yeah.
I mean, not with a massive buck like that, but I've sat and I thought, I'm just going to watch.
Yeah, it's too majestic.
I'm going to watch.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm not taking that down.
Yeah.
You know, I took down enough NVA over there in NAM, I guess. Is what
Anyway, I guess to relate that to Ohio, this is the week of gun season. So the Orange Army is out in the woods, and it ends the first week anyway. Ends on Saturday or Sunday, and it picks up in extended gun season 2 weeks later.
And please, hunters, be respectful of landowners that don't want you on their property.
Yeah.
Please don't
Follow the rules.
Follow the rules.
I won't even go in the woods until season's over. I will not go in.
Yeah.
I don't care. I will not go in wearing a Rudolph, with lights flashing and an orange jacket. I want nothing to do with being
I'll go
back.
in the woods, but I know, I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm doing and where I'm going and who's
See,
not
pretty
gonna be
good's
there.
not good enough for me. They've shot farmers off of tractors, like I said in previous shows,
have.
out in Licking County, and I'm like,
They have.
I'm done.
Where I'm hunting, it would be you'd be hard pressed to run into anybody.
That's
But
good.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Hey guys, one of my favorite topics that makes me just incredibly angry is this hate crime enhancement thing that we have in our society now. So you've heard about this Vermont shooting where some guy who recently moved from, I think, Buffalo, New York, moved to Vermont, and they can't figure out why he did it, but he shot 3 young men of Palestinian extraction in his community where he just got his apartment. And there's no history of hate against Palestinians on his social media. So rather than just prosecuting him for assault and battery or whatever, attempted murder, they all 3 survive so far.
Okay.
The big focus by the media is, the hate aspect, right? Did he hate? Did he not hate? If he did hate, why did he hate? All this. And I relate that back to the old story. Well, now it's only a few months old, but it's ancient history. The trans female, the bio female in Nashville that went in and shot those children, and the teacher and the principal and the maintenance man there at the Nashville Christian school. Her hate manifesto has been suppressed, right? It has not been released. There was a small leak, and some people in the police department got fired for leaking 1 or 2 pages of it. But the whole manifesto is being suppressed until the court does a victim. The victims of the dead people in the Christian school need to tell the court that it's okay to release her manifesto, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, wait a minute. When the Unabomber, or anybody else that has a manifesto,
if it were
it gets published immediately.
If it were a racist white supremacist, it would be all over the media.
It'd be all over the media.
Right.
New York Times would have the whole.
I'm not saying it should be, but it would be.
It would be,
Right.
right?
So these hate crimes to me are so just logically inconsistent.
It's flawed. It's a whole
Because
flawed
our
philosophy.
criminal system basically goes back to the common law. And the common law said in order to commit the traditional type of crime, we'll call them like Malum and say, things that are bad just because they're bad,
Yeah.
requires basically 2 things. You have to have an act or a failure to act when you should act. So they call that an actus reus in Latin.
Yeah.
And then you have to have a thought, a mental intent. They call that mens rea, the mental thing. So so certain crimes require specific intent. I act like on this rape. You acted with the purpose to compel somebody by force or threat of force. That is the mens rea element of that crime. The act then would be actually having the sexual conduct or contact with the person, depending on the type of crime. So sexual conduct is the act, and the purpose is the intent. Mm-hmm. Usually those crimes, and not only usually, those crimes are inevitably higher up in the hierarchy of the criminal offenses in the Ohio Revised Code and everywhere else I've practiced. So those kind of crimes already reflect more severe punishment already.
Yeah.
Or already have attached to them more severe punishment.
Yeah.
You don't need a greater enhancement. Now, this sort of begs the question, or not begs, it demands the question, how do you prove intent? Well, the jury instructions on that would typically be like, look, you can't look into the eye or the minds of others, but you can imply or infer intent rather from the certain acts or behaviors of the person committing the act. So if somebody prepared for it, for instance, if somebody went to great lengths to tie somebody up and then commit they pretty much did that on purpose, right? Mm-hmm. So you can infer one from the other, and that's okay. The problem with these kind of things, these hate crimes, is that they don't really define how do they prove the extra hate element. Is it because the person once said a racist thing, so therefore this must be racist? Is it because what would you do beyond the typical ordinary mens rea requirement to prove it?
Right.
You can't look into somebody's mind, so how do you do it? And then you would sort of flippantly say, isn't every crime tied to some degree of hate? And how are you going to define hate?
Exactly.
With a racial animus? It's absurd. So what they're going to do is imply racism just because the victim happens to be the different race of the perpetrator.
It's insane.
That's not that doesn't logically connect. That's a non sequitur, because you can commit a crime without racial animus on somebody who is a different race. It just it's dumb.
Yeah.
It's political theater.
They never proved any racial element between Chauvin and George Floyd, for example.
Correct.
I mean, he did what he did with his knee on his neck, and it was in the manual of the Minneapolis Police Department that you could restrain a person using your knee on their neck. He did it for too long. He was unwise to do that, et cetera. We can go into all of that.
All sorts of bad police work going on there.
Yeah, but there was no proof whatsoever that Chauvin hated black people.
None.
I mean,
none. It never came
at
up.
all.
This is when I've told this story before. I've texted some of my friends at the time this was going on. He said, "Did you see this?" And I was like, "Yeah." I wonder if it's race related. And my buddy said, "Of course, I don't even need to know that. I know that's obvious." It's like
white cop, black guy.
It's not
had
so
to
obvious.
be. Had to be.
It's not so obvious.
It's not so obvious at all.
And if it were, I've always said, if it were, then the proof will come out, and they can prove it, and they can treat them accordingly. And you can also reflect those things, those kind of consequence, or those kinds of can't think today. Those kinds of circumstances can also be accounted for in the sentence. So, like Ohio Revised Code Criminal Code, if you commit a felony of the first degree, which rape would be, it carries a maximum or a range of punishment from 3 to 11 years. And it's mandatory. Rape is a mandatory sentence. If you commit rape, you're doing at least 3 years. So then the judge gets to pick 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11. And then a lot of times there's other crimes that go along with it, like kidnapping or unlawful restraint or assault or who knows. So then there's another decision whether those offenses can be run wild as in the game or run concurrently. In other words, you're doing 10 on the rape and then plus you're going to do 10 on kidnapping for a total of 20 years on one act. That gives a huge, broad range of discretion to the sentencing judge.
Yeah.
And, if the judge wants to say, look, this was done, there's evidence here that this was done with all the wrong animus, like for the worst possible reasons, they can bake into their sentence a number that accounts for that.
Yeah, sure enough.
Without a special hate crime.
Yeah, like Charlie Manson was trying to start a race war and make it appear as if the Black Panthers had committed those murders at Sharon Tate's house. Right? He was trying to start a race war between whites and blacks. Now he's white, right? But he wants the races to fight each other. And in sentencing, I'm sure that was taken into account.
And there is a sentencing provision in the Ohio Revised Code that basically tells the sentencing judges, what they're supposed to look at. And without going into too much detail with it, one of the things is this worse than the normal type of offense that creates or the normal conduct that results in this crime, or is it lesser than the normal? It's like so they account for it.
Yeah.
Like, is this the worst form of this crime or something less than the worst form of the crime?
I just wish we'd get off of this. I wish that the Supreme Court would just say, look.
It's all theater.
Yeah. These hate motive enhancements just need to go. I mean, they just need to go. If I'm murdered by a guy that hates me because of my ethnicity versus a guy that just wants to break into my house and steal my shit, I'm still dead either way. Well, I don't understand why it matters if he hated me or he didn't.
Because the latter is not a news story.
That's right.
It doesn't.
It's
look as
not
good. It
a news
sound
story.
As good.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not.
All right. Well, we're sort of reaching the end.
Personally, so guys, I got to say I'm excited, and this is our technician over here, Dan, who kind of produces this podcast. I shouldn't say kind of, he does. So Dan and my fellows here at the table, I've entered my first road race for 2024. Ooh. So I am particularly jazzed. It's in Eagle Canyon, Texas, outside the city of Decatur, named after Stephen Decatur.
Okay.
So I love Texas because it has all those crazy names like LaGrange and Houston and Austin. They're all named after legendary people or figures. But anyway, Eagles Canyon in early March.
Wow.
I cannot wait.
Yeah, there you go. So Norm's blitz racing.
I'm jazzed, man. I'm jazzed. So.
Awesome.
Good.
Steve's hunting. Brett, what are you up to, man?
I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. Keep my head
Isn't
down.
today, December 1st,
Yeah.
called St. Nick's Day? Like you can do a surprise gift.
Oh, St. Nicholas. Yeah, I think you're right.
it is.
Yeah.
So
That's only for you idealistic Catholics.
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. There is something to that. Yeah.
I didn't read that in the New Testament.
good one, man. Good one. You got me.
You're right, though. I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up Common Sense Ohio. We hope you enjoyed your weekly dose. And if you didn't get enough, that's no big deal because you can get more next week. Or if you don't even get enough you need next week, you can go back to the backlog. And you can do that at the commonsenseohioshow.com website. And while you're there, you might as well like, subscribe, and share. What do I mean by share? I mean, like on social media, share. There's that little arrow that most people have somewhere on their either the phone or the computer or their platform. It's like a little curved arrow. It says share. Share that, or the symbol that shares it with your buddy, and they can then like and subscribe, and then we can grow. There's going to be lots of opportunities coming for sponsorship. We have that available now, but also just support. And we don't need a lot. Maybe $1 from 1 million people every month would be fine.
Sure.
What's $1 to you, folks? But $1 million to us is everything. We can keep bringing you your dose of common sense as you have come to expect. We are coming at you right from the middle, at least until